Welcome back to this series on recovery from child sexual abuse, with a focus on abuse occurring within the family of origin. I'm Rebecca Coffey, and I'm thrilled to be joined today by the lovely Therese Nicholas. She is a financial advisor and the wealth coach for women. And what we're focusing on today for the series is three aspects. The first is the link between having one's own sense of autonomy and the ability to have access to one's own truth and voice. The second piece is understanding the power and control dynamics in an abusive home or system. And the third part is the importance of survivors. And today we're focusing on women, staying connected to friends, community, and outside resources. So that will be our focus. But before we begin, I always like to start with a little grounding and meditation so that we can take in the content for the listeners and so that we as the speakers can just speak from our heart and from integrity. So go ahead and find a comfortable space to sit, maybe with a tall spine, maybe closing the eyes. And just allow yourself to come into this space, this moment in time. And for survivors and anyone who's ever lived within an abusive system, there can be such a feeling of fear in the body. There can be a feeling of lack of support. So I invite you right now to just feel into the softness of the body, the presence of your body, the earth below you, the sky above you, nature all around you, and your connectedness to everything and to everyone, with a knowing sense that you are never alone, that there is always some form of support, whether it's internal, whether it's spiritual, whether it comes in the form of humans or animals, there's always some support around you. You are never alone. And just relaxing the muscles in the face and the jaw. Notice the breath as it comes in, it fills the lungs, maybe goes down into the belly. And the breath as it slowly moves out of the body. At the bottom of the exhale, you can empty the belly a little bit more. And then inhale that next breath. And wherever you're at in this moment in your life, whether you feel incredibly supported or not supported at all, we can be here together in this moment. And we can reach for and feel into areas of support we might not yet have considered. And a great piece in recalling support is the practice of gratitude. So if you can see and if you can walk and if your body is healthy, so much to be grateful for, that you have air to take in and breath and lungs that work for you. And just take a moment here to think of maybe 3 things that you have that you are grateful for. Maybe even spying a bit of support that you didn't initially recognize. And we'll just take a moment here to set an intention for this video and this time of communication. Just setting the intent that anyone who is living within an abusive system will have a way to feel more supported, will have connections outside of that system, will feel their own sense of autonomy, will recognize the power in their own voice. And maybe that there will be a way where there is no way, for change, for safety, for new life. And so it is. Gently open your eyes. Okay. So I just want to give a disclaimer before we begin to talk, and that is that this video is for informational purposes only and is not meant to be a substitute for medical, therapeutic, professional advice. Okay, so it's just for informational purposes only. I always share a bit of my own story as an incest survivor in each video, and that is my own experience. And, I share some of my own thoughts and opinions, but they are just mine. So just a little reminder of that. Okay. So now I would like to introduce Terry. I met Terry 10 years ago. I was a new business owner at the time. And Terry and I met pretty synchronistically. She was giving a workshop on the connection between spirituality and finances. And I attended that workshop. And in my life, I had a grandmother on one side of my family and a grandfather on the other side. And I was very, very close to them as a child. And when they passed, I've always asked them to help guide me. And so that was my grandpa Ziggy and my grandmother. And so I feel that they actually guided me to Terry. I remember sitting in that workshop and just really feeling the support of my grandparents who were no longer living, and just asking for guidance in my business and needing different resources. And when I met Terry, she even reminds me of some of the sayings that she has remind me of my grandparents. And it turns out that some of her family and where I am originally from, there's a connection. And so they just felt like these little winks from the universe saying, this is your person, So I ended up working with Terry, and she helped me. I had never owned a business before, and I felt a little embarrassed asking questions that I didn't know the answers to, like, what do I do with my taxes and how do I get a business license? And a wonderful thing about Terry is she is connected. And as the wealth coach for women, she connects women to other women. And she connected me to a web designer and so many resources at the time. And she also advised me in my personal finances. So that's how we connected. And so I just want to introduce Terry and give you a little bit of her bio. So Terry Nicholas is the president and founder of her business, Wealth Coach for Women. She's the author of several books, including Overcoming Mediocrity, Limitless Women. She is a certified financial planner, certified success principles and money coach. She empowers women with smart money strategies so that they can enjoy life with more certainty, clarity, and confidence. So Terry, I'm just going to pause here for a moment and invite you to join the conversation. Can you talk about, do you remember when I first approached you to work with you, and maybe just talk a little bit about what it's like when you meet new women to work with?
Well, thank you, Rebecca. I remember it very clearly. I remember meeting you at the workshop, and I might be thinking of somebody else, so correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you weren't really supposed to be there, as I recall. I don't know if you sat in for somebody else, or it was like last minute that you decided to go. It was like some really synchronicity that said, I have to go to this workshop. Mm-hmm. I remember you telling me something, and I can't remember all the details because it was more than 10 years ago, if you can believe that. But, that was fascinating. And then you also shared about your grandparents. I think in our first meeting, you mentioned your grandparents and you felt that your grandparents had guided you. And that was like that head snap moment for me, because I was guided to do this work by my paternal grandmother. So whenever I have anyone come to me and they say they were guided by an ancestor who, whether or not they're even still living, it doesn't really matter. But I just instantly feel that it's almost like a big piece of rope that we're both, holding on to at either end, that's joining us.
That's so beautiful, Terry. Thank you.
You're
So,
welcome.
yeah, so I do want to just share a little bit. So, when I'm an advocate for breaking the cycle of incest and childhood sexual abuse. And, we're going to be focusing on women today, but I just want to say that it by no means do I believe that, the majority of abusers are men, that the majority of victims are women. I don't ascribe to that. So many boys and men are victims. And I also just want to say that in relationships, you can have two men or you can have two women or people who identify as non-binary. So in using the term women today, the reason that I'm doing that is because we're talking about money. And I come from a patriarchal society where historically women have not had as much access to financial resources. And so coming out of that history and seeing how that impacts women and children in abusive cycles, that's going to be the focus for today. And so where I think I'll start is maybe we'll talk a little bit about abusive cycles and the power and control within that. So even though we're looking at different types of abuse, right? Someone could abuse someone sexually, someone could abuse someone financially. The abuse is not, the goal of the abuse is not about sex or about money. It's actually about power and control. And so I just wanted to give a little overview of just give a model of the power and control wheel, which is just a model that people reference when they're trying to look at the dynamics of an abusive system. So the power and control wheel looks at the pattern of abusive behavior that is about trying to maintain power and control over an intimate partner or a family member. Some of the tactics used within that, you can see emotional abuse. Isolation is a big tactic. Denying, minimizing, or blaming. So I did just an interview last week that's part of this series where we talked about the silencing of abusers and how that system works to minimize and deny a lot of the abuse. Economic abuse, intimidation, coercion, and threats. And what I mean by coercion and threats, I'll just give an example. In teen dating violence, you might have two partners on a date and one person says, like, this is as far as I want to go physically. And so coercion would be one partner saying, but please, oh, come on, like, and sort of using manipulation. Or threat. Okay, well, if you don't want to go beyond this boundary, then I'm going to have to date someone who will. And I'm going to leave the relationship if you don't cave on your boundary. Those are abusive techniques. They are big red flags, and they're used so often in our society, we don't often even notice them. Another technique is using privilege and making someone independent or dependent on you. So that's why historically in a patriarchal society, men have had more privilege over women. And that is a power differential that we don't always acknowledge. And so in order for someone to speak their truth, they have to have a sense of autonomy, and they have to have a feeling of being independent on their own. And it's really hard if you're in an abusive system, if you are financially dependent upon someone to be able to speak your truth. So one aspect of my story I'm just going to lead in with here, I always tell a bit of my own story, is that I grew up in a family where I was very well provided for. And sexual abuse does not discriminate. You can have sexual abuse in very poor home, and you can have sexual abuse in a home that has a lot of affluence. Um, and so when I was growing up, my financial needs were met. I was provided for. And I was abused under my age of 5. I had 5 abusers, and 4 of the abusers were in my family. And I did have some memories that I always remembered. I confronted my family when I was 13. I was re-silenced. But a lot of my memories didn't come until later in life, until I was about 19, 20. And so I grew up as a ballet dancer. I went to conservatory, and when I was a high school student, I was not concerned with finding a job that would make me a lot of money. I just wanted to do what I thought was fun. And shortly after, I continued to pursue a career in dance just a little bit after high school. And then at that point, I decided to go to college. I went to UConn for about 2 years. And because I graduated high school early, I was only 19 at that time. And so I was going into my junior year of college. I visited my sister, who was on the West Coast, and she was working at a Christian school. And during that summer, I decided that I didn't want to return to UConn, that I wanted to go to Bible college. And my parents were horrified, and they didn't want me to do this. And so they said, you can do that, but we're not going to fund it, which I don't blame them at all. Like, if my kid were doing something that wasn't going to be financially lucrative, I might think something similar. So I don't fault my parents for that. But what happened is I worked 3 jobs to put myself through Bible college. I was a barista, I taught ballet classes, and I worked at Hewlett Packard as an administrative assistant. And I had never had to pay all my own bills before. And I wasn't really fearful, because I knew, well, I could call my parents if I really needed to, right? And then something happened. It was during this time, I was 3,500 miles away from home. I was financially independent, and that is when my memory started to come. And as soon as my memory started to come, I spoke them into my family, and I think something in me must have known I wouldn't be supported and I wouldn't be believed. I must have just known it. And I think that there was a correlation between me being able to stand on my own 2 feet and having those memories come. I mean, I can't prove that, but I feel that. And sure enough, within a year, I had to separate from my family to have my truth. And that's where I experienced, for my early adult years, the fear of, if I can't pay my bills, I'm it. And that's a really hard place to be for any person, to not have that safety net of family and things like that. But for many survivors that grow up in abusive homes, they know that reality. So that's really the piece of the connection between that I see in my own life, of being able to have access to my voice. I needed access to be able to stand on my own and have my own financial independence. So Terry, can I ask you now, where have you seen, when women come to you, where have you seen either their dependence on someone financially or their independence affecting whether they are in or they are able to move out of an abusive system?
That's great. And before I answer that, I did want to comment on your little piece on your memory. I think, I'm not a therapist and I'm not an expert, but it makes perfect sense, because until you felt you had nothing to lose, that's when you could speak your truth. Prior to that, it's like that reptilian brain that's protecting you, and something inside you knew if you spoke out, then you would have been kicked to the curb, and you weren't ready for that. And that's a lot of what happens with people. This is what I've seen in my experience when, because I've worked with a lot of women going through divorce, and some of them are affluent and some of them are not. And I'm thinking, I look at them and I say, my God, are you brave? I had a woman, still work with her, but she came to me about 3 years ago, and she was leaving an abusive situation. The abuse was not physical, it was all emotional, and it was all that power struggle. So prior to being married, she was somebody who had a good job, she saved money, she was very independent. And when she got married, she didn't get married like later in life, but she was probably, I'd say in her 30s anyways, when she first got married. And the person that she married was a charmer. He was this person, he had this affable personality and, kind of reeled her in. And he was reeling her in because he knew she would be the meal ticket. And there's nothing wrong with one person being the breadwinner. I mean, I'm not saying that it has to be both people have to be working, but when somebody manipulates another party into something like marriage or even just cohabitation, and that's their intention, so they can coast while you go out and work. She ended up working 2 jobs just to try to keep things afloat for a good long time. And she had 3 children, over a period of time. And she was in her early 50s, I believe, when she came to me and she was thinking of divorce. She just couldn't take it anymore. She said, I'm working so hard. I don't know where the money goes. He was the spender. And he would just spend on whatever he wanted to, but it wasn't anything that was helping the family. So he would do things like go out and buy a timeshare or, buy a car that was, broken down and, oh, don't worry, and I'll fix it. And so they have this old junk box sitting in the driveway, which she found very depressing. So as we worked together, when she first came to me, I would describe her as very frail. She was really a lot stronger than I thought, because for her to be able to do everything she was doing, she did have strength. So I know that's not the right term to use for her, but I think she was just so beaten down at that point that she appeared frail. So I wasn't being fair in seeing her that way. So I had to kind of help her find herself as a younger woman, like when she was that younger person who was financially independent, who could get a good job, who could support herself, and kept reminding her that that person's still inside you. We have to find that person. And she knew that that divorce was going to cost her financially. And in our conversations, like we just basically did a pro-con list, like, is this where you want to be 10 years from now? What is your mental health going to be like if you stay in this situation 10 years from now, or even 5 years from now? You will be starting over. It will be hard financially, but how is it right now? And she had that aha moment that I don't think I have anything to lose. I really don't think it can get any worse by being divorced. And I think the positives will outweigh the negatives. And she did get the divorce. It took a while because getting him to agree, because he was the power control. So he didn't want to agree to things. He didn't want to agree to the divorce. He didn't want to agree to the settlement. Any way he could hold things up, he did. Until finally push came to shove, and it was a matter of, look, every time you delay, it's costing you this much money. And once he saw the numbers, he relented. Today, if you saw her today, if I had a picture of her today and when I first met her, you wouldn't recognize her. You, honest to God, you would not recognize her. She went back to school. She got retrained in her career, but like a different aspect of her career that was more lucrative. She just got a really good job probably 3 months ago. After graduating, she had a child in high school, so she needed him to like get through high school because he had some issues that she had to deal with. And now she's basically an independent woman again, and she's like that person that she was, say, 20 years ago.
Wow, amazing. Terry, would you, I love that story. Would you also share, if you don't mind? I know it was like an impetus for creating the Wealth Coach for Women, the story of your aunt, if you feel comfortable sharing that.
No, I certainly will. Of course, I can't disclose any personal information, but she was a beautiful young woman. And She was married, and the person that she was married to never did anything that I saw or personally experienced, but there was an energy about him that scared me. I don't know any other way to explain it. When I was about 6, or no, I was probably a little older than that. Maybe I was about 7. I can't remember my exact age, but I can remember being in the room or near the room when she announced that she was going to divorce him. I didn't even know what divorce was. I mean, back then people didn't get divorces. I mean, you didn't hear that. It wasn't very common. And the reaction that she got from family was, can't you work it out? Who's going to take care of you? And they knew her situation. They knew that she was in an abusive situation. And yet that was their first knee-jerk reaction, was, who's going to take care of you? Her background was not one where she could just run out and get a job, but she had to survive. And I had no idea as a child. I mean, children see things in black and white. You know, my thought, which was very selfish, and I'm ashamed to admit it, when I heard, and then when I asked what it meant, and that meant that they won't be married anymore, and basically he's like out of the picture, and not you know, not in those words, but you know what I mean. My first thought was, good, I won't have to see him ever again. Isn't that awful? And my first thought was me. How it impacted me. I was too little to realize the whole thing, but that was my reaction, was I won't have to see him anymore. And I never saw him again. Ironically, he didn't live much longer after that. But aside from that, that was my knee-jerk reaction, was I won't have to experience him ever again. She was something like you know, talking about working multiple jobs. That's what she had to do to keep things together. And she was always moving around trying to find a better job. And the stress of it really took its toll on her. Now, like you, talking about repressed memories, a lot of these memories I pushed down. Not that they weren't important. And I know I wasn't directly affected. I was indirectly affected. But it wasn't until I started working with other women, like they were finding me, just like you found me. They were finding me and sharing their story. And every time they did, I'd hear a little bit of that old story. And the thoughts that came to me, and that, you know, as I've, you know, done a lot of inner work and really worked on why this is happening, I realized that there is not just 1 or 2 people out there with this problem. This is like epidemic. And people are finding me for a reason. And that's when I decided to specialize in this area so that they could find me easier. But I found it interesting that as people would talk to me, I would have little snippets of these memories come back. And the thought that goes through my mind every single day before I start my job, I do my own little meditation, just asking for support and, you know, resources that I'm serving my clients in their highest and best interest. And she's in my mind. And I wish there was somebody like me, or somebody who did what I do back then, that could have helped her.
Thank you, Terry. I apologize. My friend's dog is here and it might be making some noises in the background. It's like just barking. But yes, no, I mean, I think for so many people who find their mission in life, it comes from a story like this. It comes from, they didn't have the help, but how can I be the help for someone else? And I love that. So, you know, in my mission, trying to break the cycle of child sexual abuse and try to keep kids safe, you know, I think it's common for us in general just to think that abuse happens somewhere else. Abuse happens in other countries where kids are poor, you know. But when we think about, the circumstance of having a family be so poor that they sell their daughter to be used for sexual purposes, or they have to have, a child married out at a very young age before she's ready to be married, or even he, we think that's so terrible, right? But every day in this country, in homes that you don't even know, children are being abused because one partner doesn't have the resources or the ability to leave the abusive situation.
Well, I
And
think it's not just that, Rebecca. I think it's denial. You don't want to admit that this is happening.
right,
That's that fight or flight. You really don't want to say, oh, this can't be in my house.
yeah,
And that's, I mean, you hear about it whether or not it's even in the home. It could be outside of the home. And then the child tells the parent, their first reaction is, oh, they must be making it up. Today, I think it's not so much because it is something that is now in a conversation. But back in the day, when dinosaurs roamed the earth and I was a child, that subject just was not touched. Not at all. Somebody could see it with their own two eyes and they still wouldn't talk about it. It just didn't happen.
right. And denial is a large part of the abusive system. So, and sometimes that abusive system is a school system, or a whole society, or a whole generational family. So absolutely, denial can be the first reaction.
And I think also it's denial, but I think it's also when it's a child, they don't know. They might not know that that's wrong.
Oh,
If
absolutely.
it's something that they're exposed to from an early age, they don't know it's wrong. It's not until they're older when they start connecting the dots and they say, oh, that person shouldn't have done that.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. So we can see, and there are so many reasons why an adult in an abusive situation doesn't leave. There's so many factors, and not that I pass judgment, because um, you know, they are being controlled psychologically. They might be being controlled with fear and threat of their life if they leave. There's so many factors, but one is financial.
Right.
A lot of times, if a person is able to figure out how to stand on their own, or if they just feel like they have a big enough safety net, whether that's community or other family, or some usually resources outside the home, then they have a lifeline to start to make that path out of the abusive situation. And it is a tactic of abusers to isolate and to make sure that that person is not connecting to friends and not connecting to community or sometimes family. So that compounds the complexity of it. But I want to talk now about the importance of women in particular staying connected to other women, to community. Sometimes women have a sense of shame about what's happening or what they've allowed to happen to themselves or their children, so they don't reach out to others. So one thing that I do in my own work is I lead a monthly women's circle, and that's something I've done for years. And I find that just women coming and connecting to one another in a safe place, it can be a lifeline. We see this in yoga studios or a gym where women are in terms of women connecting to other women. So can you talk, Terry, about how you do that in your work, connect women to resources? I know you did it for me, and just share.
Sure. So every situation is unique. And when women come to me, if I suspect that there's a problem, like whether it's an abusive situation or, financial, I will connect them with an accountant. I can connect them with a therapist. I can connect them with a divorce attorney. And sometimes even just speaking with another woman who's been in a similar situation, might just be enough to give them a little bit of I'm not alone. But I think that one of the things in my education process with talking about finance and education in my coaching process is really trying to help women understand money. and understand what it all means to them, like long term, not just like what's in your wallet today. What does it cost for you to live? Where is your money going? Is there, if you really had to pull back, how would you do that? If you needed to, if you're in a job, and I had one woman who, she had already gotten out of a really bad situation with her marriage, but that marriage did such mental damage to her, psychological damage, that it took her years to get on her feet mentally. So, and she was working. And the job that she was in, she was so underpaid. She was probably making half of what I'd see other women in her field make. And I tell her this every time we get together. I'd say, you're really, part of your problem is you're significantly underpaid. And she said to me, I'd rather walk down the street naked than look for another job. That's how beaten down she was. So part of my resource was helping her build up her confidence and doing exercises with her to help her build up her confidence and showing her how to look online for open opportunities. The bottom line was she did find one, and within 6 weeks, she had a job that doubled her income. But that was all doing that inner work of building up her confidence. Had she not found that job, then my next thing would have been to put her with a career counselor, somebody who has more resources than I do personally, if her process was taking longer than it needed to take. But in her case, because the work that she does, and I kept telling her that you are in demand. The work that you do, there aren't enough of you out there. And I proved it to her by just going online and showing her all the openings, and said, just let's work on your resume. Let's clean it up. Let's get it, looking really good and get you out there. And then we worked on her interview skills. So it was like step by step. Let's baby steps. Let's find out how we're going to get you from point A to point B without you losing your mind.
Beautiful. Thank you, Terry. I wonder, I would gather that you agree with this. So, when a woman is in trouble, or someone's in an abusive situation, it can be one thing to give a handout, but I feel that it's more effective to really give women the means to stand on their own 2 feet, and it gives them a sense of like, I can do this, I can make my own money. I feel like it calls out of them the resources that are already within them, and that everyone has them. And that sometimes it just takes a little bit of education or a little bit of something. But can you talk just a little bit about how you see the importance of really empowering rather than just like giving something to someone?
No, absolutely. And that's what the whole coaching process is all about, is that you draw out of a person what's already inside them. They have the answers. They do. They have the answers inside of them, but sometimes that's what the coach does, is they help pull that out. So yes, I agree 100%. A handout, short term, somebody's in a bind, they can't buy food. Yeah, that's one thing. But long-term handouts never work. That's been proven. But a leg up does. There's a huge difference between a handout and a leg up. And a leg up is when you put your hands together and you give them that support so that they can get to that next step.
Beautiful.
And sometimes it's just asking those questions. So as an example, I had a woman I was working with. She came to me and I knew she was in a bad situation. It wasn't physical, but it was, it was that control, unhappy, just very, very unhappy, really depressing situation. And that was giving her that, you can see it in someone's eyes. They have a look like a whipped dog. They really, it's awful. And when you see that come through the door, it's heartbreaking. Some of them, sometimes the work that I have to do with them in the beginning is to get them to stop being the hostess of their own pity party. They get so caught up in the story that they can't get out of their own way. So that's something that has to be taken care of and addressed right away. And once that's done, then it's just a series of questions. Well, okay, you're in this situation. you feel like you're all alone? Do you have a family member that you could go live with for a while? Do you have anybody in your life that could help you even for a month? And often they come up with the answers. Oh, I could ask Sally, I could do this, I could do that. What could you do for them in exchange for them helping you in this situation? So it's not taking, it's a reciprocity. And when they see that they have something to give, especially for women, I think that's the key that opens the door. Is okay, I'm not on the taking situation. I'm not just this person who is in desperate need. I can show up at your doorstep, but I have something to give back.
Yeah. And so it gives a sense of dignity and a sense of empowerment. I love that.
Absolutely. That's where it all comes from, is just having that resource. And then the other piece is a lot of times when they're in that situation, they lose their way as far as knowing their purpose and mission in life. And when I can help them reconnect with that, that also is an empowering process for them, because now they can see themselves, they can close their eyes and they can visualize themselves in a different situation.
Beautiful. And I want to talk now just a little bit about, like, how someone can psychologically be beaten down and disconnected from the sense of their own value. I think we're all familiar with The Great Gatsby, either the movie or the novel, which as an English teacher I taught for many, many years. But the novel details money, right? It's about old money, new money. And the character Daisy Buchanan, she represents the most privileged in American society at the time. She's a very privileged woman, and yet she has very little power in her marriage. And there's a scene where she is with her husband and Gatsby, who she's having an affair with, and the two men talk for her, like back and forth over her, and they're like, she loves you, no she doesn't love you, like they speak for her. And in that conversation, I wrote down this quote. Her fictional husband, Tom Buchanan, says, the trouble is that sometimes she gets foolish ideas in her head and she doesn't know what she's doing. And that is just one beautiful example of how someone in an abusive, intimate relationship is told over and over and over again, you can't think for yourself. Women are, not as intelligent, like, you're not doing a good job. And being told that day in and day out really can make a person feel like, wow, I can't think for myself. I'm not intelligent. I'm not, and so when someone gets out of that system, they need a support of other people around them to say, you do know what you know. You are smart. You can do this. You do have resources inside of yourself, because that was the tactic of the abusive system, which was to break that down, which it sounds like in your work, Terry, that's exactly what you do, is reverse that.
Right. Exactly. And it's still surprises me that I still see it today, because I thought that was the olden days, like before the 60s and all that. But no, it's still very prevalent today. There are still a lot of women that feel that the man is the financial plan, or that the man takes care of the money. And there, for many women, if they are single by choice or just happen to be single, or now they're divorced or they're widowed, and they find themselves in that situation, and now, oh, it's my job. I've got to figure this stuff out. And they get intimidated by it. But it's just, when I can show them, it's just numbers. It's just a tool. It's not a big deal. And break it down for them that way. You don't have to get from 0 to 60 miles an hour overnight, in a nanosecond. There's steps along the way that you can figure all of this stuff out. My paternal grandmother, who is the one who was really like my mentor, when she and my grandfather were getting married, this was back in the 1920s. I think they were married in 1926, and they lived in Sicily. And that was a society where she grew up, you had to work the land. They were like serfs. I mean, way back in the day, if you wanted to eat, you had to work the land. The only way she would ever climb out of that system was to leave. There was no plan B if you stayed in Sicily. You would either work the land or you died, one or the other. And she made a decision as a young girl. She had lost her father she was very young when her father died. And she made the decision that this is not how she wanted her life or future generations of her to live. So my grandfather and she were dating and getting serious. I don't know if they called it dating back then, but anyways, he wanted to marry her. And she said, she gave him two ultimatums. Do you want to know what they were? One, you bring me to America, and two, I handle the money.
Wow.
That was unheard of, unheard of. But he really wanted to marry her. And that was the only way she was going to marry him. And he fulfilled both. They came to America. She always handled the money. He had a little barber shop. She was a tailor or seamstress. So, I mean, as blue collar as it gets. And he would come in at the end of the day from the barber shop, and he had his money in this little velvet pouch. I can still remember the black velvet pouch. And he'd take the money out of the register, a lot of coins. And she'd take it and divvy it up into different envelopes for, the rent and the food and the this and the that. And she always had an envelope for charity. Always. And she always had a little stash for an emergency. And her feeling was, if you have something available to give to someone who's worse off, then you're not poor. And that was her abundance mentality. She never worried about money. She talked about it, talked very openly about it, never worried. She just had a great deal of confidence that between her and my grandfather, they would always find a way to provide. And they did. They never had the wolves at the door, as she used to say. It took them 20 years to buy their first house, but they did it.
Yeah. That's so beautiful. I love what you mentioned about her giving, and I do think that there is something when you really believe that you have the resources that they appear. And, I've shared a little bit today, but not too vulnerably. And, Terry, the struggles that I have had. And, there was, throughout my 20s, there were times where I thought, if I can't pay my bills, what will happen to me? There were so many times where I was afraid. And, because when I was going through coming out with my abuse, I didn't really tell people what was happening with me. So that really isolated me. And a lot of people looking back on my life say, wow, like you're so strong, like you've bought several houses and you've, put yourself through the rest of your college and did all of this stuff. And when they say that to me, I think, I did a lot of praying and there were a lot of miracles. But I don't really feel happy looking back, because all I feel is I never want someone to go through that, because that's not how we're meant to live. I think we're meant to live in community, in tribe. We're meant to support each other. If I had been able to come out with what I was struggling with and said, like, I can't be connected to my family because I was abused, and just had asked for more help, my life would have been less scary. Even though I was provided for, it was a lot of fear a lot of the time. And so my audience of survivors, that's one of the reasons why I encourage so many to ask for help, to not live in silence, because it's that compounds, the complicated process of getting resources. And that's why I think, having, we used to have, like, society used to be connected with synagogues and churches and mosques and things like that. And that's not always the case now. People don't have some of those social services that they used to. And so we have to create new ways or find new ways for people to connect to, other women connecting with women, men connecting with men, or just like groups of people coming together to support support people and give them a safe space to talk about what's really going on. Because in everyday life, you might go to work, but you're not going to tell people, I'm scared that I can't pay my bills and I have a lot of stuff that's happening in my life. But we need someone beyond just a therapist or just, two people to tell what's happening to us. Because when we do, and we make ourselves visible and seen, that's when someone can say, I know someone, and maybe you could be connected to this and to that. And so I really believe in that community aspect. Is there anything you want to add on that, Terry?
I do. I agree. I think that having community is essential. But I think that when it comes to you and your story, I hate to see you beat yourself up over it. I really do. I believe that we're on a path for a reason. And we have the experiences that we have for a reason. They might not be what we want. And when we look back, 2020, we always have 2020 vision when we're looking in the rearview mirror. But when you think about it, Rebecca, if you had an easier time, if you were 20 years old and you said, oh, I'm in this situation, I'm going to tell people and I'm going to ask for help, and therefore things were easier. Today, you sitting here in front of the camera, you might not be doing this because you thought, oh, I was 20, I figured it out. What's the big deal? And I don't mean that in a disparaging way, don't get me wrong, but sometimes when we go through a challenge and that challenge is not a challenge, we don't have the respect for it and we don't have the vision to see how it could have been better. Your seeing how it could have been better has inspired you to share that with others to make it better for them. So you think of all the people, all the lives that you're touching and have touched over the last 20 years, you might not have done that otherwise. So maybe it was hard for you and you wish it wasn't. And I wish it wasn't hard for you too, but you flipped it around. You made a choice, you made a conscious choice to flip that around and say, how do I serve? How do I serve the next person? How do I give that next person the leg up with my knowledge and my support?
Well, thank you, Terry.
You're welcome. It's my 2 cents for all it's worth.
Yeah, absolutely. You're right. I think we want to be for others either what we didn't have or, something like that. So absolutely. Yes. And maybe the last thing I just kind of want to touch in on, it's coming to me, so I'll share it, is just, I think it's the importance of knowing that you're connected to more than what you see, knowing because money sometimes is like in abundance. Abundance is more than just money. Money is just like one
The
means.
tool. Yeah.
But there can be a magic to it. And there's something about faith. And I remember when I was young, choosing to give every time I got money and making that choice to give. And I think there's something, a lot of spiritual traditions have that. And I think there's something really important about that, to see that the money flows and that it comes in and it can go out. And I did it mostly because I didn't want to have a fear of giving. I wanted to break that fear. I recognized that I had that and I didn't want it to rule me. So I was like, I'm going to do something to try to move that, And I do think that when it comes to finances or how we are in the world, that there are certain principles of our attitude toward money, our attitude toward abundance, believing that we are abundant, believing that we can give. I've just seen over in my own life and in other people's lives that there's a real power in that. And I feel like that message is hopeful. It's like hopeful. I can just try it. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work, but I'm going to try it, and there's something kind of cool there. So
definitely. And that has been proven, tithing, some religions call it tithing or organizations refer to it as tithing, but there is a mental trigger that occurs. When you have, which picture, I like to put things in buckets. So let's say you have this bucket and it's filled with money and you've got a certain amount of bills and you're looking at that bucket and you say, gee, I hope I can pay my bills this month, right? And then instead of thinking that way, you say, you know what? I'm going to take X amount off the top, and I'm going to give it to X organization. And I am confident that is just telling the universe that you're confident that you're going to fill it back up again. And it always works. Now, if you gave it all away, I'm not saying it's going to all come back the next day. And I don't know as far as a dollar amount, like, is there a ratio? I know 10% is the tithing, like they always say, tithe 10%. I don't know if there's any specific ratio of how much, but I do believe, because I saw it I've seen it with people my whole life. My grandmother, who had, if you looked at her, you'd say she has nothing, but she had everything. And she always had money to give. That was like number one. Whether it was a charity or a family member or somebody who was worse off, she was the first person who somebody died, she'd show up, not with like a cake, she'd show up with the whole dinner. You know, no kid, this is what she would do. Anybody, somebody had a baby, she'd go over with the meal. That's how she was. She always, and she never had any fear of putting food on the table. That was just something that just was foreign to her. And I believe it was because she had such a generous spirit. I really do, because people that I have met, whether they're in my family or out of my family, that hang on, they're the most miserable people you'd want to meet. And they never feel like they have enough. And because of that, their trigger is when they have money, they're like the glutton at the all-you-can-eat buffet. And all they want to do is spend it. They don't want to give it. They just want to spend it on themselves. It's the weirdest thing. I don't know any other way to explain it. But I do believe that when you have a generous heart and you give what you are comfortable giving, I don't care what the amount is, but if you have giving as part of your repertoire, you show up differently than somebody who doesn't.
I love that. And I mean, those were the qualities of my grandparents too, that they always, my grandmother would make pajamas, not just for her kids on Christmas, but for the neighbors' kids. And,
Yeah.
Always, making what seems like a small change purse go like a
Yeah.
far, and yeah, I think our grandparents maybe they'd certainly pass down magic to me. And I know your grandmother did too. So I think as we're coming to the end of our interview, we're circling back to those magical grandparents. Yeah. Yeah. So Terry, thank you so much for your time today. I appreciate that.
You're welcome.
I'm going to say goodbye to our viewers, and then you hang on so I can say goodbye to you. Thanks, everyone.
Okay.